Our next reader is D.S. Waldman, author of the newly published poetry collection Atria, from Liveright, Norton. His writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Los Angeles Review of Books, and many other publications. He is a former Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford University and recipient of a Poetry Society of America's Lucille Medwick Memorial Award. Please welcome D.S. Waldman.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Chase, for your poems. And thank you, everyone, for being here. This is my book, Atria. It's a hybrid text in that it proceeds mostly in different prose forms, little vignettes, slender vignettes, long sort of narrative leaning prose poems. There's an essay in the middle of the book, but there's also like an unusual crown of sonnets in the book and some more familiar looking lineated lyric poems. And I'll try to give you a sample of those. I won't make you suffer the essay, but I'll read some of the other things. And I'll begin, actually, I'm glad John Berger came up. The epigraph to my book is borrowed from him. So I'll read the epigraph and a couple of the early poems in the book, which sort of overlay art writing with these sort of like, I think they're kind of breakup poems, sort of like in the beginning of the book, the speaker has like recently ended an engagement with their then fiance. The relation between what we see and what we know is never settled. John Berger. I should have mentioned the first poem is titled Calder, as in the artist Alexander Calder. Calder. It is the act of entering that creates loneliness. I stand at first in the corner and can't bear it, the stillness of them, a child looking up from a crib, reaching. The door at my back leads to a balcony and is locked, boxing wind out of the composition. The thing about art, and especially three-dimensional art, is I expect it always to teach me something. The dialogue between the sun and dew flowers tracking east, the head turning to catch in its gaze the leg of a stranger as they leave the room. I begin to move, to walk about the mobiles. Outside on the balcony, leaves skitter in wind. Daylight in and out behind clouds. In the dream I've been having lately is how one might begin a poem in this room. In mine, at a party, I look up and am told I'm the oldest in the room by several rotations, a condemnation, a measure of both time and distance. Last night, waking from this or another dream, I looked through a scatter of Polaroids on the bedside table. In one, she stands next to a Joshua tree. The sky is blue and cold, and she smiles, mouth closed, at the camera. A family enters, and the child moves about the mobiles in a whirl, a step ahead of his mother. Sunlight in a wedge on the wall over a quotation from the artist. Disparity in form, color, size, weight, motion is what makes a composition. And when the child reaches for one of them, one of the red spades accenting the dark wire, his mother waits. She lets him touch it, once and briefly, before taking away his hand. The last moment in that poem is true, and it's one of my favorite art experiences. There was this room at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art where they had just hung like 5 or 6 large-scale mobiles from Calder, and this kid just comes running into the room, and like these things which are meant to be in motion are held in like institutional stillness in this museum, and this kid just comes running in and like swats one and like sends it spinning. It was really lovely. The docent didn't think so. The next poem is titled The Colne Concert. Are folks familiar with Keith Jarrett, the jazz pianist? Yeah, he's a improvisational jazz pianist known for this concert called the Colne Concert, in which basically he was traveling, touring Europe in 1974, I think, or 75. And there was a blizzard, and his concert grand piano didn't make it to the venue in time. And all they had was this untuned sort of practice piano whose outer keys didn't work. And he decided to do the concert anyway because it was being recorded for an album. And it turns out to be sort of like one of the most widely streamed and well-respected like jazz concerts we know of. The Colne Concert. We showed up with a U-Haul and a Prius and could not see the ocean. They lay it on thick there, a friend had said of Pacifica, 2-3 weeks at a time. We pulled off at the bluffs before taking our things to the cottage on Winona. 5 hours it took for the cat to fall asleep, and the door chimes woke him. The Pacific was hard and restless in the fog. It was entirely improvised, they say, an hour and 6 minutes streaming back and forth between jazz and classical and broken across 4 parts. The concert became famous in part because of the quality of the audience, careful as they were not to applaud or cry out until Jarrett had entirely stopped playing. You can hear in the recording at the end of each section a moment of full silence before the crowd erupts. I heard it for the first time that summer on recommendation from a dying poet. I listened on gray walks to the seawall, the weed store, a coffee shop with no bathroom or food service. It was June and I was half-zipped in a winter coat. Our cottage was small, 800 square feet, so we took calls with our therapists in the Prius. I walked by on my way in from the cliffs, pretending I hadn't noticed her. The cat swished his tail at the screen door. Critics dubbed his a homesick lyricism, celebrating Jarrett's merging of the modern and the nostalgic. His long, uninterrupted improvisations were punctuated almost always with moments of dissonance, his hands playing at 2 different time signatures. A sort of churning, the late poet had said, like he's clearing the chalkboard between movements. I found myself listening for these slippages, harmony giving way, one hand dancing into a different time. Bly wrote a poem titled Listening to the Colne Concert, which I read years before knowing the concert or Keith Jarrett. The notes abandon so much as they move, he writes, and later in the stanza, the music is my attention to you. A creek ran downhill past the cottage and emptied somewhere into Blue Whale Cove. We knew no one, just our landlord and his adult son, and we'd walk along the wrinkled creek water. The path took us to that same lookout, our point of origin. It was rare to see more than 20 yards out into the cove, but a handful of times in August the fog burned off, the sky shock blue. The first whale we saw was young and curious, breaching on one, then the other side of a small fishing boat. Elle saw it first and got very quiet. Then she took me by the hand and said my name. I'm always hesitant in New York to say that the cottage was small, 800 square feet, because I feel like that's palatial in Brooklyn. The next poem sort of bridges 2 of the sort of threads or interests in the book, from sort of like art writing to these elegies from my brother who passed away in 2014. So this poem is sort of like a hinge between those 2 like blocks of content that permeate the book. It's called For 3 Years. For 3 years after my brother died, I was a painter. After work, I'd park my truck and roll a hash worm in tobacco, then address the easel on the kitchen counter. Acrylic was cheapest, and I let it cake on the faux marble. I had studied architecture, but never painting, so I didn't know how to render faces or hands, couldn't mix the colors I wanted to see. At some point in the evening, I'd make a gin and tonic. I learned sometime later the word underpainting. What is painted, then painted over, covered entirely with subsequent layers of paint. Textures and shapes survive, though the viewer perceives only the outermost contours, seams, or faint ripples across the surface. I'd sometimes have friends over and ask them to make marks or write phrases, flick water on the dry acrylic. I would stream the Colne concert from my phone, tell D and J to do something interesting. We'd been in a ketamine phase, and I watched them from the couch, their slow bodies in yellow stove light. Then I only heard them, and from far away. My brother was not a painter. He was an EMT, a drinker, then a photo on the counter. He never met these particular friends whose names push out from beneath one of my better paintings. He drove the same Toyota sedan as D, though, who drove most nights and never woke me before he left. Next poem is also a brother elegy. I wrote most of this book when I lived in Oakland, and has anyone been to Oakland? Yeah, some Oakland, yeah. In downtown Oakland, there's like a big water feature. It's actually a tidal estuary, but they call it a lake, Lake Merritt, and it's sort of like the thing that everybody walks around, and I lived up the hill from that. And sporadically, I would see this guy who was sort of like a doppelganger of my brother's. He had this my brother was very big, this guy was very big, and he had a similar coat. So this poem is in the form of a voice note to my sister about this doppelganger of my brother. It's called Likeness. I saw this guy tonight in Adams Point by the lake. The sun was getting low, so I'd taken a break from grading. This guy in one of the green Carhartt jackets smoking by the water. The light was really orange and in his face, and when he turned my way for a second, I don't know, I just needed to check in on you. Is the ginger coming in okay, or did you have to dig it out? I was telling Gabby about your backyard. It's really something. 2 or 3 times this year, I walked through the botanical garden and thought to send you a photo of the bunny orchid. It's purple and white and blue and flowers best in June near the solstice. Sorry to hear about Luna. She was a really sweet cat. One of the last times I hung out with Maddie, we packed lips in his apartment and talked a lot about Dad. I know your relationship was a little different, so I don't want to make things weird, but he told me how Dad slapped him around this one time as a kid. Maddie's paintball gun discharged in the house and broke a pane of glass. I guess Dad took him out to eat after that steakhouse off Palumbo and let him drink a beer with his burger. He was telling me this and spitting into an empty Dasani bottle. His jacket wasn't green and it wasn't a Carhartt, but it was that same style, impenetrable knit with the hood. I just stood there by the lake looking at the guy for a second too long probably, and he kind of got weirded out. He mean-mugged and shrugged at me. The fuck are you looking at? I turned home early and I had to take the long way since the gardens close at sundown. I'm back home now, watching the sky above the city get all purple and dark, a little white where the stars come in. Now that Gabby's moved in, I'm never really alone, but she's out tonight, drinking mezcal on Grand with a friend. The last thing he said before I left his apartment, he'd screwed the blue cap on his Dasani bottle and walked me to the door, was that I should get my brake lines checked. I guess he'd heard something when I pulled in. Now whenever I hear that whining sound when a car pulls up to the stop sign by our building, I think of him and that dingy apartment. I remember how big he seemed inside that jacket when I clapped him once on the shoulder and stepped out through the open screen door. He was holding it for me. I'll read, I think, one more poem, which I have not read out loud, and it's sort of a departure from the other things I've read. Although it does, I guess, deal with some art writing. I consider myself straight, and thank you. But my first sort of like romantic experience was with a boy. It was with this like childhood friend of mine who I was best friends with from ages like 3 to maybe 14. And I think this experience is probably not uncommon among the straights, but we don't often talk about it. So it sort of hold art writing, hold early queer experiences of straight men, and sort of dreams. Okay. It's called On Photography. I've quit smoking and am dreaming again, have been needing to run my hand over the quilt, name 3 smells, 3 things I see nearby. I crack the window. Rain in the city is a dirty smell, and I see the flesh of my arm unlit in the steel window frame. Before G left for Spokane, we brought the Polaroid into the bedroom and said what we feared in each other. I liked what her shoulders did with the word casual. She took the camera and told me not to lie. She likened the photographer to a Zen archer, something about having first to become the target. She didn't have to tell me to look when she pressed the shutter. I light a match and let it burn on the counter, little scar on the tile. In the dream tonight, I was with David in his mother's closet, putting my hands up the sleeves of a dark fur coat. He smelled like grass, and we'd lost track of time. Thank you.